It started at midnight. I woke up to the sound of someone dragging something heavy across the floor above me. I don't have an upstairs neighbor. The sound was slow, deliberate, like metal scraping wood. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more. That's when I noticed it, the faint glow of a light outside my window. A light that wasn't supposed to be there. My apartment is on the edge of a small neighborhood, just a few blocks from a dense forest. It's quiet, even during the day. At night, the silence wraps around you, so loud it feels alive. I liked it at first. The neighbor next door, Mr. Caldwell, was one of the first to welcome me. Tall, thin, polite, he always wore a hat pulled low over his face. He didn't say much, but he had this way of watching you. Like he was studying how you moved. I thought it was harmless. Until that night. The dragging sound came again, louder this time. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. Caldwell's yard was lit up by a single lantern, swaying gently in the breeze. And there he was, standing next to something massive wrapped in a tarp. He was dragging it toward the forest. I couldn't see his face. But I could feel him looking at me. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. I told myself it was none of my business. He could have been moving furniture, or cleaning out his yard. It wasn't my problem. But then I heard it. A tap. Gentle at first, then more insistent. It was coming from my front door. I crept toward the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. The porch light flickered as I pressed my eye against the glass. No one was there. The tapping stopped. Then my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a single message, "You shouldn't have looked." My stomach dropped. The message didn't have a number. Just blank sender information. I wanted to call the police, but something in me hesitated. What would I even say? My weird neighbor sent me a creepy text. Instead, I decided to check the backyard. The lantern glow from Caldwell's yard had disappeared. But as I stepped outside, the air felt heavy, thick with the smell of iron and damp earth. The fence between our properties was low, and I couldn't stop myself from peeking over it. The tarp was gone. In its place was a trail of dark stains leading toward the trees. And then, I saw it. A single shoe, half buried in the dirt. A woman's shoe. I stumbled back, the screen door slamming shut behind me. My eyes darted to Caldwell's house, expecting him to appear in the doorway. But the house was dark, empty. Or so I thought. That's when I saw the shadow. It shifted, just slightly, in the upstairs window. I bolted inside, locking every door and window I could. My hands shook as I dialed 911. But as soon as I pressed call, the line cut out. Static buzzed in my ear, followed by a voice, low and guttural. It wasn't the dispatcher. "You shouldn't have looked." The lights flickered. A thud echoed from the ceiling. My ceiling. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and made my way upstairs. The hallway stretched endlessly, each step creaking louder than the last. I reached my bedroom and froze. The window was open. And there, sitting on my bed, was the shoe I'd seen in the dirt. Caldwell's hat rested beside it. I ran. Out of the house, into the street, straight to my car. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The lantern in Caldwell's yard was back. And in its glow, I saw him. Standing perfectly still. Watching me drive away. I don't live there anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that dragging sound. And I'll never forget the words he said to me before I left. "You shouldn't have looked." The first time I noticed something strange, it was 2:13 a.m. My neighbor's garage light was on, flooding the empty driveway. I wouldn't have thought much of it, if the garage door hadn't been half open, and if I hadn't seen someone crawling under it. I live on a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind where nothing ever happens. We all keep to ourselves, and that's how we like it. But my new neighbor, Mrs. Downing, was different. She moved in a few weeks ago, a petite woman in her 50s, always wearing gardening gloves, even in the rain. She never spoke to anyone. Her house was immaculate, flower beds blooming, lawn trimmed to perfection. But there were no curtains on the windows. At night, the lights stayed on, casting strange shadows against the glass. And then there were the noises. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear faint thuds, like something heavy being dropped. It was unnerving, but I convinced myself it was just her moving furniture. Until that night with the garage. I stayed by the window, watching. The garage door shuttered as it lowered, but I couldn't see who had crawled under it. I told myself to go back to bed, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a jacket and stepped outside, my footsteps soft on the pavement. Her driveway was empty, but the faint hum of electricity buzzed from the garage. I bent down, peering through the gap at the bottom of the door. It was pitch black inside, except for a faint red glow coming from the far corner. Then I heard it. A low, raspy sound, like breathing. And suddenly, a shadow moved, too fast to be human. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet as the garage door creaked open just an inch. "Can I help you?" I jumped, spinning around to see Mrs. Downing standing in the driveway, her gardening gloves slick with something dark. I stammered an excuse, something about insomnia and fresh air. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You should go inside now," she said, her voice cold. "It's not safe out here." I didn't sleep that night. The sound of breathing stayed with me, growing louder in my head. The next morning, I couldn't help myself. While she was out, I went to her backyard. Her garden was pristine, but there was a patch of earth near the fence that looked freshly dug. I knelt down, brushing the dirt aside. That's when I found it, a bundle of thick, knotted rope and a pair of cracked glasses. I froze as a shadow fell over me. "You really shouldn't be here," Mrs. Downing said, standing just a few feet away, her gloves off now. Her hands were pale, her nails jagged and stained. "They don't like it when people dig." "They?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She tilted her head toward the garage. "You'll find out soon enough." I ran. Back to my house, back to safety. But that night, I heard it again, the raspy breathing. This time, it wasn't coming from her garage. It was coming from my backyard. I was folding laundry when I first saw him. My neighbor, Mr. Harper, standing in his window, staring straight at me. He didn't move. He didn't blink. And for the next 3 nights, he did the same thing. I live in an old apartment building, the kind where everyone's windows face a shared courtyard. Mr. Harper has lived across from me for years. He's quiet, keeps to himself, and never caused any trouble. But recently, something changed. Every night at exactly 10 p.m., I'd glance out my window and see him standing there. No lights on, just his silhouette framed against the glass. It was unsettling, but I told myself he was just a lonely old man. Until the night I waved at him, and he waved back. I tried to ignore it, but his staring became more frequent. He'd be there in the mornings, afternoons, sometimes even during the day. Then one night, I noticed something chilling. In the faint glow of the streetlights, I saw a second figure in his apartment. A woman. She was sitting at his table, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, completely still. The next day, I decided to confront him. I knocked on his door, my heart racing. When he opened it, the smell hit me first, rotting food, or something worse. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm. I just wanted to check in," I stammered, my eyes darting past him. His apartment was bare, except for the table. And the woman wasn't there. "Is everything okay?" I pressed. He smiled, but it didn't feel right. "Everything's fine. Have a good night." And then he closed the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I stayed up, watching his window. At midnight, the woman appeared again, sitting at the table. And this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Her reflection didn't show up in the window pane. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture. When I looked at it, my blood ran cold. The table was empty. And in the photo, Mr. Harper wasn't staring out his window anymore. He was staring directly at me. The next morning, I woke up to find something taped to my door. A photo. It was me, sleeping in my bed. I haven't seen Mr. Harper since. But at night, I still feel like someone's watching me. And sometimes, I catch a glimpse of her, just for a moment, in the reflection of my own windows.